Hey guys, what is going on? It's me, BitCuriBox12 here, and welcome back to another Realm of the Mad God video. Today we're going to be doing a comparison between the old and new Godlands Sprites. As most of you probably know, the recent Godlands rework just went live and has been met with reception. Positive, negative, I'm not really sure. I don't read. But I figured we'd break them down piece by piece, look at each sprite individually, compare it to its previous incarnation, and see what exactly these new sprites are doing. Kicking things off, the Medusa. Classic sprite, in my opinion, the face of the Godlands. When I look at her, I still think of an Abyss of Demons portal dropping, even though that made no thematic sense. But what we have here is simply an iconic sprite. That bright green, wavy snake hair, the bright red eyes, those lanky arms that look like she's trying to give you a hug without bending her elbows. Yeah, back up, lady, I'm good. Back up, back up. Then we got the new one. And from far away in the Godlands, this was actually one of my lesser favorites. There's a big difference between looking at these sprites isolated and up close in detail, versus far away in combat while you're playing the game, clashing with the old sprites that still exist. In fact, I'd recommend that anyone who is on the fence or against these new sprite changes to take a second look at them up close like this. You might actually develop a more positive appreciation for them when you can see them for what they are without all the distractions. So right off the bat, the biggest change here is that the green hue is darker. And while a part of me really likes the old bright green, this more earthy and shaded tone I think suits the character just as well. Speaking of shading, there's a lot more now. Instead of using one darker shade of green for the whole lower half of her body, it actually has layers to it, and I think they pulled it off quite well. The tail also no longer curls around like she's giving you the okay. Her skin tone is also more peach. Her arms are a bit stubbier this time because they have removed her hands. We also have some shading around the body to emphasize depth and shape. Strangely enough though, the bow or quiver on her back has been completely removed. Maybe it just didn't look right with the new sprite, or maybe they thought it was unnecessary, but kind of odd. By far the biggest change, however, is the hair. We still got 4 honkin' snakes, but they're thick little guys now. A couple of chonksters. Because of this extra room, now we can actually see their eyes. Overall though, I do like this new sprite. I think they kept the spirit of the original intact. They took some liberties here and there, but ultimately I think it paid off. I was a bit on the fence at first, but after taking a closer look, I've come to really appreciate the work done here. Next up, we've got another classic. The Ghost God, which was always my personal favorite to be afraid of. Veterans can let out a sigh of relief because this is the one sprite that really hasn't been changed much at all. It's the same exact shape as before. We've got that droopy mouth, directional sway, drifting ghost particles. The only difference is that the hue is a bit lighter. More on the blue side, less on the gray. Same goes for the eyes and mouth. Instead of black, it's more on the dark blue side. Most likely to give it that more transparent look, to appear more ghost-like, so I can get behind that. Not much else to say about that. I think it's good. About as good as the original. Sprite God, on the other hand, bit more significant. So like many of these resprites, the saturation has been dialed up. The pinks and purples are more bright and rich. I think it creates for a very eye-catching enemy. We've got a stray particle on the top left. The eyes are closer together, and the internal shape has a lot more detail in it. Has a better sense of form. Got a squiggly entity trapped inside there. The Sprite God almost looks a bit humanoid now, compared to the broken purple Dorito it used to look like. In some ways, I can see it losing a bit of its old identity. They basically took the old sprite and made it more horizontally compact. Whether or not that's an improvement is going to vary heavily depending on the style you prefer. As for me, this is one of my favorites, but it has admittedly lost some of the charm of the original, and I just don't think there's a way to keep it exactly the same by adopting this new look. It's a sacrifice I'm willing to accept. The Sprite Child even received a change, looking more like a star now. Next up, the Beholder. Like the Ghost God, the shape here is completely unchanged. It's the colors and shading where the differences lie. A much darker skin shade here. Mike Wazowski was in the sun way too long. An off-white, more vanilla sclera. Actual coloring on the iris now. So now the pupil is no longer encompassing the whole thing. The little shine was even rotated to the left, and an additional skin shine was added to the eyelid, which actually makes it unsettlingly realistic from far away. Kinda gross. Kinda freaks me out. He's a sweaty boy now. Flying Brain, similar thing. This one actually already had a pretty decent amount of shading on it before, so they just moved it around a bit and also gave it a pink shine. The tentacles now are all completely congruent though. We no longer have that one stray that goes the other way, and part of me kinda liked that because it made it seem more chaotic. more like a tangled mess of tentacles that didn't have a rhyme or reason, because that's more in line with how a real squid or octopus would behave. Rarely are things this squiggly, perfectly symmetrical while in motion, but I do admit that the new presentation is a bit cleaner. The eyeball, however, completely different. It's been lowered so now his forehead really pops out, and he's kind of angry looking. He's mad now, like you disrespected him back in high school. 20 years pass and you bump into him at the grocery store. Now he wants revenge. It's a far more attitude-centric look that really really goes away from the soullessness that the original sprite had. And that was kind of why I liked it. This creature didn't seem like it had a motive. It really was just a flying brain. It's not a person with complex emotions, it's a monster. But now, as I said, he's kind of angry. So this is another one where I'm kind of torn. I like them both. Can't really say I have a preference on which one goes in. The Ent God. Another case of simple changes making a big difference. It was only now that I realized that the original Ent God's kind of missing some hair when you compare it to the full lush head that the new one has. The green's been given a lot of dimension to it. Really sells the illusion of leaves stacked on top of one another. But the brown hue is pretty close to the original. It even gets darker in the area right below the leaves, which is where you'd expect a shadow to be cast. Eye color's more warm, mouth just as gaping and shocked as always. He's missing the tiny leg root branch on the side, and I guess the Ent's been hitting the gym because his arms are massive compared to before. An equal thickness all the way through. I definitely appreciate the fuller design on this one, but I do admit that there was a charm to the more scattered approach of the original design. Kind of like he's falling apart, doesn't have it all together. But I suppose this new look is more appropriate given how strong the Ent God is. The Jinn is yet another similar case to the Ghost God, where the original shape is almost completely maintained. He's just rocking more of a Squidward head now, and a tassel to go on his classic Jinn cranial appendage. But the folding of the arms has also been simplified. Bit less shading, not as harsh. It's lighter. And the shoulders have been uncapped, so to speak. Didn't even realize it until now, but yeah, those are some pointy shoulders on the original. There's an added sash to go around his waist, very genie-like, and the whole sprite has been given a saturation overhaul, incorporating a lot more vibrant shades of blue, all of which they get the sky blue ninja seal of approval. The Leviathan is our special case today, because it's actually had 3 different sprites. The original cyan manatee-looking thing, I actually used to think that these were the eyes, this was the nose, that was the mouth, and this was an arm. It's like a snowman with a hook hand. Then the second Leviathan sprite comes out, I forget when this was, but they decided to take out the McNuggets from his diet and slim him down. Now you can clearly see the serpent tail snaking around him. They got rid of the tip though. Some darker shading under the neck was added, more advanced colors all around, a more white cyan look, orange eyes and a red mouth, so I was actually looking at the proper face this time, and purple ears, or antlers, whatever. And in the recent update, we got our third and final draft, or should I say giraffe. He kind of looks a profile shot this time. The tail tip is back, eyes are yellow now, 2 white teeth instead of a mouth, a more muted purple shade that actually runs all the way down the spine, giving an even better indication of how this creature is shaped. It looks like a genuine sea monster now, and while it does feel radically different from the original, I think this is the best it's ever looked. The Slime God. This is another case where, in-game, I thought these two looked radically different. But up close, I realized not much has actually changed. Shading has been moved around a bit. It's not so prominently occupying the edges as it once did. We have added shine on the forehead, the mouth drippings have been balanced out, with an added drip on the left side connecting the lips together, and a more tight composition of the eyes. But again, I must reiterate, in-game, I thought these two were very different. Now after seeing them up close, I actually really prefer the new one, because they kept it very close to the original, and just spiced it up in a couple of spots. I think it might be this dark patch behind the eyes that makes it look like one giant eye from far away. That's the only thing that kind of throws me off. But aside from the Leviathan, the white demon without question underwent the most radical change. See, the old one was kind of goofy looking, how his eyes were spread far apart looking you dead in the eye, a simple cyan, blue, and white color scheme because he's a white demon. They gave him the demon-like goat leg approach and his little fingers. New sprite on the other hand, it's night and day. Like Leviathan, we now have a 3/4 profile shot. The wing is so much more pronounced, the inside being much darker. A lot of different combinations of blue and white going on here. Almost looks like he's got a beard. His horns and tail are black to stand out. The way that his feet and arms dangle gives the illusion of levitation, like he's hovering towards you. If it wasn't for the shock value of how different this was from the beloved white demon sprite, I'm positive more people would be on board with this because they did a really good job here. There's a lot of character in this sprite. I think maybe it might just look a little too small compared to the other gods from this new perspective. While facing forward, he looked really big and wide, but from the side, he's kind of thin and wispy. With this new update, we were also given a big change to how lucky gods were handled. Instead of only having a lucky Jinn and Ent, now every god has a lucky counterpart. And while most of these are just a bigger, golden version of the old sprite, some of these were actually given enhancements. Beholder looks utterly terrifying now. Looks like he's been cooked to golden brown perfection, and the white of the eye is now almost black. Lucky Jinn has a bit more shine now, same with the flying brain, and the ghost god. Leviathan, his eyes look like they're shut now. Medusa, no change. Slime god, a couple of the eyes are missing. interesting. Sprite Child, no change. Sprite God almost looks like fire now. And no change, but the white demon has been given an enhanced wingspan. This one looks really cool. I kind of wish the other ones received a significant buff like this. 2 completely new gods were also added to the roster. The Sting Spider was originally from the Wild Shadow era. My first reaction was, wow, look at that behind. But then I saw the original. Oh my god. The old sprite is definitely more cartoony, kind of goofy. Looks like a silly spider running around trying to smash you with his... whatever that is. But the new sprite is a bit more serious, more scary. Not sure about the Great Owl's origins, but again, up close, I think this looks really good. They really nailed the beak and the eyes, and I think the wings look really good in motion. Constructs have even been changed to be more distinct from one another. And while I really dug the old robot look that all 3 of them shared, each one has a more personalized characteristic now. The rock golem has a flat head, it's more blocky, with a nice blue trim, whereas before, no one would fault you for mistaking it for the steel construct, which did have a really luscious shade of blue. But like the other sprites, more shading has been added, more detail. Shines on the shoulder, a gold trim this time, completely flat square hands, and no more toes. In fact, all 3 of them share this feature. Same thing with the waistline. It's not quite as skeletal as it was. The new wood construct looks on point. Shares the same kind of pointy branch hands as the Ent God. Similar eye and wood color too, and an appropriate green vine lacing. I will admit though, I did kind of prefer the taller, somewhat skinnier robotic look. The new ones look great, but they also seem kind of hunched. They don't quite carry the same big presence they once had. It's still there, just not as much. Of all things though, the mysterious crystal was even changed. Just cleaned up the edges a bit, added this powder blue to the edges, got rid of the gray, and kept only one solid shade of white to make it look more clean. And I think it pays off tremendously. As for the crystal prisoner himself, this is another one that's not too different. Although like the Leviathan, this was a sprite that I really didn't know what to be looking at. I thought that this thing around his waist and chest was a mouth, and these were eyelids, and he was like a really festive slime god. Took me years to realize, oh, he's a borderline jester. Funky hat, draping robe, hands out, he's a magician. The new sprite is just a bit cleaner. More blues instead of only purple. The white has been removed from the chest, almost like they knew I was confused. His eyes are no longer off-center, thank you. And his hat is no longer crazy and scattered like before. The crystal prisoner steed, however, feels very different, even though it still has all the same components. The eyes now match the same color as the hair, whereas before they were dark purple. Kind of made the whole character obscured and shadowy. Color saturation's up just a bit, but the legs are very different, at least at a standstill. But something about these cartoon millipede looking legs are so silly to me. It's like he's wearing boots. And the same thing actually happened with the Headless Horseman. The Horseman himself looks great. You can actually see the pumpkin now. The space where his head used to be has a much more realistic groove. Makes way more sense for it to be wide than long. Not sure whose head would fit in there. You can see his belt, he's more green. Cape's a bit shorter, but that's okay. The horse has a rope, he's looking at you, but those feet, I can't get over the feet, man. It's just not menacing. Again, it loses that majesty it had before. Also, where does tail go? What, is that it? That little lump? All right, I can buy that, I guess. And while I appreciate them making a new custom horse sprite that isn't just a Gigacorn palette swap, you can even see the horn right there. I think that the profile shot kind of suited it better. Now he's just kind of looking at me like, So there's some good and not so good with this sprite. The horseman looks great, but the horse itself I think should look more like the Nightmare pet skin. That should be the gold standard of how to make a cool looking sprite steed. And finally, the red demon himself. Before, the red and white demon were just palette swaps. Now we've actually kept the straight ahead profile headshot. You can see his hands are out like he's trying to conjure energy like some kind of Dragon Ball Z villain. One leg is higher than the other, once again showing that levitation. His eyes are closer together, they're yellow. Inside of the wings, horns, and tail are black. They took a very simple design and turned it into something very hyper detailed by comparison. On the whole, when looking at these sprites individually, like I said in the beginning, I think they did a really good job. With that being said, those were all of the Godlands sprites, both old and new. I'm personally excited to see what they do with the rest of the game's respriting, and as nostalgic as I am, I'm okay with letting go of the old look. In any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, don't forget to check out the next episode whenever I post it, which will probably be soon. Alright? See ya.